Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are happy to talk to Johnny May. He is the author of a new book called Lethal Keystrokes. This book is all about a sort of a cyber terrorism, cybersecurity sort of scenario, and he has some terrorists who are using the internet and computers to try to create terrorist attacks and the people that are trying to stop them. And so, in this wide-ranging conversation, we talk about cyber terrorism and cybersecurity. Johnny May is a medical doctor, a professional musician somehow, and also was a computer programmer earlier in his career. So he is an interesting expert on this whole situation. We talk about social media, screen time, cybersecurity in the medical world, all this type of things. This is an interesting conversation, fascinating author. The book is called Lethal Keystrokes, and here's my conversation with Johnny May on the Cameron Journal podcast. Let's go. This is the Cameron Journal podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am so happy to welcome John May to the podcast. We're talking about his new book called Lethal Keystrokes. And this book has to do with how technology is affecting our lives. It's supposed to be action-packed and explain through clever storytelling how the interconnectedness of our world is affecting us all. So welcome, John, to the Cameron Journal podcast. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so let's start from the beginning. What inspired you to write a book about modern technology?
Well, I've always had a keen interest in technology, computers, etc. In fact, I worked at IBM as a programmer analyst for several years before I decided to have more human contact and go to medical school. So, but my interest in technology and has always been there. And then actually during my medical career, I started over the decades, seeing the impact of technology on my patients, on the children, screen time, etc., and the invasiveness issues, and also security issues, working in hospitals, etc., with people's sensitive data. We always had to be very, very cognizant of breaches of security, whether just leaving your computer unattended for a second or things much worse like ransomware. So I've always had a keen interest in technology and how it integrates into our lives.
I mean, that's rather impressive. You we're kind of like, oh yeah, computer programming was fun. And some people would have just been like, oh, let me get a promotion or change departments. And you're kind of like, you know what my life really is missing? A medical degree.
Yeah,
I
that's
should
right.
go become a doctor. I'm always impressed by people that do something that's really elite and advanced to switch to another elite and advanced thing is crazy to me. I'm
Yeah.
just always very impressed by that. So,
Well,
all
thank you.
right. Yeah. So why don't you walk us through the basic plot of Lethal Keystrokes?
Well, without giving too much away, I believe my interest is stoked by a couple of things. One, I've also, besides interest in technology, I've also been interested in reading about why certain countries, certain groups want to become a terrorist organization, want to attack another country, for instance, the United States. Or any other Western nation for that matter. So I had a lot of interest in what happened in Somalia in the early 90s. I thought that's a story that just has been forgotten. You got the movie Black Hawk Down, but then the whole thing that happened to Somalia after that has sort of been forgotten. And then so those are my antagonist guys. That's the roots, how they might want to do something to harm America. And then some of the other interest in technology I have is things like personal assistants, home assistants like Alexa and so on. So there have been many articles about an invasion of our privacy, people listening. In fact, Google employees listening perhaps to home conversations, etc. And that, upsets me actually, but it was intrigued me. And then there was a couple of articles about how they were going to increase the power of the listening devices in these units. And that really got me thinking about what if somebody could use this kind of technology against us, not just the freaky voice over the baby monitor, coming from the crib, but what if there was a real impact on our society? So that's how I got inspired. And I'll tell you, sort of take it from there.
Yeah. So what's the basic of the book? So you've got the Somalis on one side and people with Alexa on the other. How does it all go down?
Well, it all goes down by the invasion of an individual's privacy, and that person may, in fact, have a very important job in the infrastructure of America, and particularly this is situated in Northern California, Southern Oregon kind of area, Northwest. This person is very important in managing an infrastructure, and his personal data, etc., could be compromised by this group. And so that is the gist of the problem. People are starting to investigate another kind of terrorist thing but it was set up maybe by other people as a red herring, or was it? And so the FBI goes chasing after all sorts of terrorists. Meanwhile, in the background, what I'm trying to get at is so many people think terrorism today is what it was in the past. AK-47s in airports and bombs in public places and marketplaces. But what about lethal keystrokes? What about how much damage terrorists could create in our society by attacking our infrastructure through computers? And so it's that group pitted against the FBI trying to track them down. And from the second half on, it is just cat and mouse and chase and action. And most of my readers say they can't put it down. So a lot of story building at the beginning, as I've described, and then it rocks from there.
Very nice, very nice, very nice. So the whole cybersecurity, by the time this goes to air, the conversation I had with Scott Schober about cybersecurity will have posted. Cybersecurity is one of those things that's rather esoteric, even though it's been a word and an aspect of our lives for 20 years. Most people still don't understand how it affects our lives. So what kind of research did you do to figure out how this sort of thing might be pulled off?
Well, the internet is a wonderful thing. So I started out by just reading about cybersecurity and breaches of cybersecurity that have occurred in the world, and how what the impact was, and what the people did to protect themselves or to recover from the cyber attack. So my computer background, I mean, I don't want to get too technical, but I do understand some of the ins and outs of, how do you break through firewalls, et cetera. But it's a fascinating topic, and unfortunately, there are lots of articles about it, but then there's a lot of secrecy about it. No one really wants to talk about what they're doing to prevent a cyber attack at their facility, at their business. I mean, most people, they buy an antiviral software for their computer, and that's the end of it. I guess I have an interesting story. I bought one of the leading antiviral software packages for my home computer, and in the process of the monthly download of all the updates, somebody hacked into the update. And so not just my computer, but a whole lot of computers were affected.
No. That's kind of defeats the point of an update.
Exactly. And I had to, I won't mention names, but I spent an hour on the phone with a tech from the security company trying to explain to them. They just didn't believe me. I said, the source of the problem is the update you sent. Your update somehow got hacked. And so that's the problem. So you need to do this, this, and this. And finally, they listened to me, and I actually solved the problem for them. It was that was quite a few years ago, and everything's a lot more sophisticated now. But certainly, it can affect us enormously, whether it's turning off the electricity or whether it's just simply what we have now that's quite common, ransomware. They hold your data for ransom. It's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned in the beginning that you were kind of also inspired by the amount of screen time and how is it affecting grandchildren and patients and all this type of thing. What has been your observations of how social media has affected our health?
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but certainly I've done everything from family practice to taking care of cancer patients and doing palliative care. So I've had a lot of variety in my medical career. And the biggest thing that I thought was important in medicine was family and social interaction. Nothing is better than seeing families communicate, good parents communicating with their children in a healthy manner. So that's person-to-person communication. And so in the business, I'll call it business, that I worked in, it's so important. You can't be aloof if you're talking about cancer care or palliative care, etc. You're face-to-face. You're in there, and it's very personal, and you learn all the nuances of a personal interaction. Take that and then put it on a phone and swipe left, swipe right. All it is 1 second blurbs, and people are finding people a date, or whether it's just sending all your communication by emails and texts and using emojis. That is not human contact. And I think a lot of people mistake all this technology for human contact, and it's not. And I think the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all forced into some degree of isolation, I think some people started to realize that, Zoom meetings and, Zoom dinners and cocktails and texting and watching each other on video just wasn't the same. And we started to really get the message that we should be interacting with each other personally. And so right from the children spending too many hours in front of a TV and not socializing with friends or playing sports, to adults, again, isolating themselves, not going out and meeting people and being with people, just communicating through technology. And I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah, there's been a lot of a lot of talk about that. And as someone who has lived both sides of that, like, I'm old enough to remember the years before the internet, but I was also I'm young enough to have had it be a huge part of my life. In fact, If people are listening to this conversation, they probably found this episode via social media.
Mhm.
All this type of thing. I've always had this kind of dual relationship with it, where it's like on the one hand, I realize it's ills, but at the same time, though, it is a huge part of my brand. It's a huge part of the traffic. It's how the Cameron Journal exists at all. Um, and so I kind of have this tortured relationship with it where it's kind of like, yeah, it's not that bad, it's not that great, but it's also my whole business. And
Yeah.
I think, what would you say to people who are struggling with hearing all the ills about social media and all this type of thing, but have also come to be quite accustomed to interacting with, friends and family, especially if they're a bit far flung over social media, where physical interaction is too expensive, too time consuming, all this type of thing. Where do we find the balance? I think that's what people are struggling with, is that we know that social media is not great and we need to, not do it as much, but it's also a great way to communicate. Where do we find the balance in that?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that. I think that with all things, sometimes we need to step back and say, how is this impacting my life? But key is to remember that these are tools, and they started out as tools and one form of communication for when, as you say, it's too far away, people are too far apart or not enough time. They're great tools. So all the social media stuff is excellent, but it shouldn't be your lifestyle. It's a tool, not a lifestyle. And there's too many people that just fall into the easy route of just communicating that way. And I think you have to remind yourself that there's nothing, and this really sounds hokey, but there's nothing better than a hug, personal contact. And so, yes, you've got these people that you communicate with. If they're important to you, you need to make your time to communicate in a different manner than just social media. And I think it's just defining the balance is to realize I'm using this as a tool, but there are other better ways perhaps of doing this, and just keep reminding yourself of that. I think it's not so simple as, just limit your screen time per day. I think that's not how it works anymore. Technology and social media is just too prevalent, too pervasive in our lives. So that's silly. Yeah, but how you use it is important. As you said, it's an amazing freedom what social media and technology has provided for us. Actually, before I wrote this book, and before I went to medical school, I was a professional musician and songwriter. And I back in the days of putting out records and doing concerts and stuff like that in person. And now anybody can create a song and put it on Spotify or whatever social. It's freedom. That's great that there's so many people can have the access to putting stuff on a YouTube channel, putting stuff on Spotify. But there's no triage. There's no one looking at the quality. And it's just actually ends up being a bit of chaos. And in fact, if you look at some of the things that have happened with social media, such as the insurrection stuff that happened in Washington, it's anarchy. Everybody's truth is equal, and that's not correct. So there are actually there's a group of hundreds of scientists of all ilks trying to determine how we should look at the internet and social media as far as the good and the bad. How do we get truth back into the world? It's not just who do we believe anymore, and how do we lead that conversation back towards centering it around some sort of general truth instead of everyone's having an opinion like in free for all. Like I know I go on. I get
No, no,
passionate about
no, no. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. It's like, and yet another career we've discovered. Like, It's like programmer, musician, and then at some point you're kind of like, you know what people really need? Doctors. That's where I'm gonna go. Um, it's yeah, so I mean, let's also kind of turn our attention to, speaking of medical, the medical profession. How has technology changed medicine?
I have found that the internet is a great source of information, and people research their symptoms, and they come to a medical appointment. I had one patient come with a file folder that had to be at least 2 inches with articles printed off the internet about what they thought was wrong with them. Another guy came with a whole 3-ring binder. He was an engineer, and he said, this is what I think's wrong with me. This is what we should do about it. And I said, well, okay, you're just here to tell me what to do, but I'm here to work with you. But let's put it this way. You're an engineer. If I went on the internet and I read a whole bunch of articles on how to build a bridge, a big bridge, like, cross a river or something made out of steel and concrete, and you would trust me to design and execute that plan because I read about it on the internet? No, it's context. And that's what my training is allowing me to do, is to put whatever ails you into a context that makes some sense, and then we can discuss it. So right from the get-go of the internet and all the information that's available is wonderful for patients, but it's also confusing if you don't know how to interpret the information and you can't put it in the right context. Then it becomes a bit, you could be led astray very easily. As far as on the good side, I think that the diagnostic ability of our scanners and just our basic CT scanners and MRI scanners and PET scanners are all filled with such incredible technology that allow us to see things so much more clearly and make sense of them. So that's amazing. Of course, there are new lab tests and new medicines all the time. Fantastic, created by artificial intelligence, some of them, or just by the amazing technology that's available there to sequence DNA, for instance. As far as artificial intelligence replacing a doctor, you just stand, walk up to a computer screen and it asks you a bunch of questions, answer them. I would say that's a bit of science fiction. That's got some ways to go before it becomes really useful. Have I ever used a diagnostic program? Well, when I was really, really, really stuck, yeah, I wanted some ideas, and it gave me ideas. I still had to make the decisions. So I think technology in medicine is just even patient records and the transmission of patient records between doctors, hospitals. All of this is good stuff. So it's an enormous impact on
Yeah.
healthcare. In fact, when I left IBM and still had a lot of my programming chops, when I graduated from medicine, I spent some time with a programmer developing some software to run a medical office. It didn't really pan out much more than a few 100 users in the local area, and I got too busy to participate. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic unto itself.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's odd, like, again, old enough to remember the old days when, the doctor would bring in, the insurance billing form, and that's how everything was filled out and all this type of thing, to now where everything happens on a computer, every, orders for medication, everything, it's all
Yeah,
digital now. Like, I was just in the hospital for kidney stones 2 weeks ago, and there was
that's too bad.
probably as many, thank you. There was as many computers as there were nurses and doctors, like it
Yeah.
was,
It,
they haven't digitized the IV drip yet, but give them time.
yeah.
Um,
We
you
need we
know,
need the Star Trek infusion through the skin. That's what we need. Yeah.
yeah, I'm still waiting for that because invariably every time I go to the hospital, I've got at least two IVs going. Um, and
Yeah.
so I also have severe asthma, and I've been in the hospital stays where I've had up to four, two in each upper arm,
Mm,
two in each hand. Um,
mm,
and
ouch.
So it's been a little crazy, but yeah, that digitization hasn't gotten there yet, but it seems to have reached every other part of
Yeah.
medicine. And especially now with like data and data privacy, to circle back around to the cybersecurity thing, I feel like it's only a matter of time before like people's like medical records, like what happens if people, if they start dumping medical records or take them hostage or whatever have you, like there seems to be a lot of existential risk that nobody really talks about.
Yeah, that has actually happened. I don't know. I live in Canada, and there's been a couple of situations where medical information has been held ransom, and hospitals have had to pay hackers to get the medical data back. There have been incidences where files and a computer were put onto a hard drive for the secretary to back up on an offsite computer. She mislaid the hard drive. It wasn't password protected in any way, and the records fell into wrong people's hands. And a lot of people in the Toronto area um, uh, had their medical information out there in the world. And you can imagine just the what an invasion of privacy.
Right, right. So when it comes to these medical privacy issues and this, record keeping and cybersecurity and all this type of thing, what do we do, and how does it affect people? How can we put a stop to it? Or is it just, an odd sort of thing? How's that in your experience?
A program, about 15 years ago, where if you personally were responsible for a data breach, and that could be simple as you're logged in, looking at a patient's information on a screen in the nursing station or the doctor's workstation in the hospital, and somebody says, "Doctor, come quickly," and you get up and leave, and your computer is logged on, you get a $50,000 fine for that. And if the hospital is any way found responsible, that was $1 million fine to the hospital for any breach like that. So very serious consequence. In fact, I did get burned that way. I had exactly that scenario happen. I was looking in a little side room off the nurse's station, doctor's computer station, had a patient file up there, and I was called away. I had to rush over to do something. When I came back, of course, the computer had timed out, logged back in, and carried on, and thought nothing of it. The next thing I know, I forget how long it was. Hour later, I was hauled by security into the CEO's office and told that I had accessed one of the staff members' medical records. And the reason was because the person had fallen down the parking lot, broken their leg, and the other nurses wanted to know how she was doing. And so they saw my computer logged in. They went over, checked the information on their buddy, and but that's under my name, and I'm hauled down and threatened with a $50,000 fine. So it can happen so quickly, and it can happen to somebody that's very, very aware of these issues. So it is this reliance on technology is great. It is helpful, but it is so easy for things to go the wrong way.
So yes, I mean that's a difficult situation, and I understand, the high stakes nature of the environment and all this type of things. It would be, it's very kind of difficult to, to manage all of that, and deal with this new aspect of security in our lives. Like it almost feels like, it's we know to like lock our doors on our homes at night. We know to lock the doors on our car, all this type of thing. But I feel like when it comes to computers and security, we haven't reached that level of the habits and whatnot, you know, the locking of the digital door, the setting of the virtual
Absolutely.
car alarm to make
Yeah.
sure that things are relatively secure. I feel like we're not in that habit yet, and after 20 years we almost should be, but we aren't yet.
Oh, I
And
totally agree. Totally agree with you. I mean, look at the number of people that use 1234 as their password or
I
their code.
know, I know. We can't even get online passwords right. Um, and it's funny because conversely, you know, you have that issue, and everyone's like, "Oh, change your online passwords." You know, if something happens, all this type of thing, and whatnot. But then people also resist using biometric data like facial recognition or fingerprint to, you know, secure things as well.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like this weird thing where it's like, you know, people aren't don't want to they're resistant to doing things that would be easier and more secure than passwords, but then won't keep proper password security at the same time.
Hello.
Uh-oh, are we still having
Hello.
connection issues?
I really don't know what the resistance is. I think there's some strange quirk of human nature. For instance, I'll just give you an example about um, uh, cancer, people's fear of cancer. They would say to me, you know, I'm really concerned about drinking water from plastic bottles. How many parts per million of toxic chemicals are in that, you know, water from the spring water in the plastic bottle? And yet they don't wear sunscreen when they go outside. And I had this happen in a meeting with I gave a talk, and a person was a smoker, and they didn't wear sunscreen when they went outside in the sun, and they were fair skinned. So the risk of cancer from getting melanoma, skin cancer, or dying of lung cancer far exceeded any possible risk of any minute particles of toxins in water. But people jump to that. And I've even had, going back to security, somebody will say, I see on TV this fingerprint thing. They just take you over and put your finger on the button, and that doesn't, so it doesn't matter what their passcode is. They chop your finger off and they put it on the thing and get it scanned. Oh, well, isn't that dramatic? You think that that's really going to happen? What's really going to happen is you've got a crappy password and somebody's going to hack you remotely, not break into your house and chop off your finger. So there's a human nature to take things very dramatically and ignore and forget the mundane. And the mundane is have a password that's at least 8 digits long and a combination of things, not 1234. And don't worry about somebody cutting off your finger, taking your eyeball out and doing an iris scan. But they were, you know, the influence of movies.
Yes, no, that is obviously very much lifted from movies for sure. And yeah, that is no, I mean, I think we all I think a lot of that has to do with the media and the risk level perception, right? Like
Yeah.
plastics in the ocean and chemicals from plastic gets a lot more press than skin cancer. And incidentally,
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat. I vape and a lot, and I am biracial and have brown skin, and I live in Seattle, so I never wear sunscreen. I didn't wear
Right.
sunscreen when before I moved here, and I certainly don't now because it's only sunny here for 3 months of the year. So
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
it's all about like what gets the press. Plastic gets the
Yeah.
press. Skin cancer
Yeah.
doesn't get nearly the press.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, very much so. And I think the point I was trying to make was that in my book, Lethal Keystrokes, one of the characters just, you know, isn't very good with home security. He's got a device that can listen to him. That's one thing. But when he enters his password, you know, it's short. He uses the same password on multiple sites, and he often mutters the password, speaks it out loud as he's typing it in. How ridiculous is that? So, and this guy is very important. So how simple it is to think of somebody using his computer, et cetera, to do bad things. And the other thing that got me thinking was during the pandemic is all this working from home, how that changes security. All of a sudden, you've got people, they're doing very important jobs is their internet secure? Are they doing it from a location or house or somewhere, a cafe or outdoor cafe? Is the internet secure? And all of a sudden, this job that they were doing at the bank or whatever, no one would have ever questioned the security of the system at the bank. But now they're working from home. So and it's really got me thinking. So that's a lot of that was fodder for the book.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like working from home for IT people to have to do it all so suddenly and for so many people was a security nightmare. Well, not only a logistics nightmare, but just a security nightmare to try to keep, data secure over a wide variety of internet connections and all these outside devices accessing a network and making sure only the people that are supposed to be there are there. I mean, that I just, shout out to the IT crowd who had to manage that overnight.
Yeah, 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 for sure. It's an
Absolutely.
enormous task. And
Yeah.
when I was a computer analyst at IBM, one of the things I had to do, I had to monitor this one program, make it sure it ran worldwide, and I had to make sure it worked properly. And there was one woman, sorry about that. There was one woman that had the job of doing some entry by manually keypad, and the program would crash, and they have to call me at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would just say, just don't run her data, and I'll fix it in the morning. This one woman just couldn't get it right, and this is year after year, and so you've got these weak links in complex computer systems, and it's human error that can bring it. This program ran in IBM worldwide, and she could bring it down with one keystroke, a lethal keystroke.
That's very clever. That's bravo, sir. That's very impressive. Yeah, yes. Clap, clap, clap. If we had an audience, they would applaud.
Yeah.
Well, we're reaching the point where we talk about plugs and where people can find you on social media or find your book. So why don't you walk us through how we can interact with you online?
Well, you can interact with me, Johnny May 365 on I guess Facebook, Instagram. JohnnyMay.ca is my website. And that's also Johnny May is the name I use for my music. So Spotify and YouTube. So if anybody wants to check out my music. And of course, my book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and in Canada, Chapters Indigo. And of course, you can always bug your local bookstore person to order it from Granville Island Publishing in Vancouver, Canada. So lots of ways of finding me.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. We appreciate you for coming by today.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to chat with you. And it's been really enjoyable. I'm sorry about the little technical glitches there with the audio, but it's been a very delightful experience. Thank you very much.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.